Before we go to Consolidator Grant in particular, let me just give you a very, very brief overview of the general aims and principles of ERC grants. ERC, the European Research Council, has four, let's say, large grants and one small type of grant. And the large type of grants are the following. So starting and consolidator and advanced grants. These are individual grants that are structured according to the career stage of the researcher. So you can start applying to the ERC grants when you have at least 2 years after your PhD, then you belong to the starting grant target group. Then after 7 years after PhD, you move to the consolidator grant target group. And finally, after 12 years after PhD, you are in the advanced grant target group. The starting and consolidator grants, they very much take into consideration that the researcher, the applicant researcher, the principal investigator is still at the very beginning of their research career. And the goal here is to support researchers who are at the starting phase of creating their own team or creating their own research topic and program. The advanced grants, however, they target researchers who are already established research leaders, who already have some experience with also mentoring the younger generation of researchers. So in the criteria for advanced grants in the CV, you find also aspects related to mentoring and supervising. These are the main ERC grant types, but since now many years, the ERC added a fourth very large grant type, which is called the synergy grant. For starting, consolidator, and advanced, as I said, these are individual grants, but the synergy grant supports cooperation of 2 to 4 principal investigators. So it is not a consortium of different research organizations. It is rather that the different PIs and their teams, of course, they work together to create something really spectacular. They tackle problems that need this kind of multifaceted approach. These projects that are funded under synergy grants, they are usually interdisciplinary, but it is not a requirement. It can be, for example, also within one large discipline, but the problems themselves should be of a nature that really demand this kind of synergetic approach by different viewpoints on the problem. And these synergy grants, they are also large grants. They are have a larger financial contribution than the starting consolidator and advanced grants to really allow the small team to address really interesting and groundbreaking problems. Then in addition to these 4 large grants, the ERC has also one smaller grant type. This is called the proof of concept grant. And the target group of these grants is really limited. It is limited to these people who already have one of the big grants. And in case there are research outcomes in their main grant that have a potential for commercial or social innovation, then these small proof of concept grants allow the exploration of such potential, so to bring the results from these ERC main grants closer to the market. All ERC grants have a common characteristic. The research proposals that are funded by ERC must be groundbreaking, they must be ambitious, but of course, at the same time, they must be feasible. And we will come back to that when we talk about the evaluation criteria for consolidator grants. The scientific excellence is the sole criterion, and the scientific excellence is broken down into let's say, criteria. So scientific excellence, yes, but it is looked at via a series of questions, and we will look at these questions later on in my presentation. It is very important that ERC applications can be made in any field of research. ERC prides itself by funding really all types of research, both basic research and applied research. The term that they use is frontier research, so it can also be applied frontier research, and any research field really is eligible. The ERC has a system of panels. We will talk about that also later. And the panels should not be taken as suggestions, or they should not be taken as preferred fields of research. It is just a construct that allows ERC to evaluate the proposals. So it is more of an administrative nature, and the panels are constructed in a way that enables to cover the whole spectrum of ERC of research. So the ERC really aims to fund research in any research field. And all research grants awarded by ERC also involve an organization. The grant is not given directly to the researcher, him or herself. The grant is given always to an organization. The organization is called host institution. So the application must be done together with a host institution in Europe or associated country. But it is important to note that the host institution itself is not part of the evaluation. So the evaluation is limited to the researcher and the proposal scientific idea, and of course its implementation. So it is not a competition of one organization against the other. It is the competition of researchers and their innovative ideas. At the same time, when the host institution must be established and work in the EU member state or associated country, the applicant does not have to be in Europe at the time of application. The applicants can, of course, be of any nationality, but also they can be at the time of application situated outside Europe, somewhere else, and they apply together with an European institution, and they move upon the award of the grant. So it is perfectly okay not to apply with the organization where you are currently based, but it is quite common, and I think in most cases, in case researchers are already based in Europe, that they apply with the organization that they currently work in. However, it must also be noted that ERC grants are fully portable. It means that when the researcher moves from one organization to another, they can take the grant with them, and it is totally acceptable. It doesn't have to be re-evaluated or anything. They just notify ERC, and of course, the new organization has to agree to this. So the grants can be transferred from one European organization to another, but still, the new organization must also be in Europe. I don't see any questions about this at the moment. If you have, then don't hesitate to let me know by raising your hand or using the chat. So this was a short overview of the ERC grants aims and principles, and I will now continue with specifically the Consolidator Grant, and even more specifically the Consolidator Grant 2023 call for applications. This is the timeline for the Consolidator Grant 2023 call. The call, as you know, has been opened already. It opened on the 28th of September this year, and the deadline is on the 2nd of February next year. So this is the time that you have for preparing your application. The ERC aims to fund roughly 300 applications this year, and the evaluation process of ERC grants has several steps. And in the case of Consolidator Grant 2023, the planned date to inform applicants of the results of the first steps is in July. Then you will know whether you have already failed or you will be invited to the second stage. And then the final results will be announced in early December. And after that, the ERC has some months to conclude the grant agreements with your host institutions. So it is expected that people will start their projects in the 6 months after the notification of the positive results. So this is the grant timeline. Now let us go down to the technical details of the call. So the most important thing to consider in case of Consolidator grant is your eligibility to apply to this particular type of grant. As I said, the ERC main grants, the starting, Consolidator, and advanced, they are the grants are divided between these 3 categories according to the career stage of the researcher. To apply for a Consolidator grant, then at the date, which is the 1st January of 2023, that the 1st January of the call year, you must have at least 7 years after your PhD defense and not more than 12 years. You notice that there is a little asterisk after the 12. So in my next slide, I will explain what are the ways of extending this application window. There is also a novelty since this year compared to previous years. The ERC has changed the date of what is the reference for this eligibility assessment. So since the start of ERC grants until last year, the application eligibility was the award of the PhD. So the date that is on your PhD certificate. But this created a lot of inequality because in some cases the PhD was officially awarded maybe a year or even more after the defense. So since this year, and it was announced already last year, the criterion has changed, and the ERC now considers the date of the successful defense, the date that is the basis for the calculation of eligibility. If you defended your PhD in Estonia, then your PhD certificate has both the dates of award and also the date of defense. So it is no problem. You can still use the copy of your PhD certificate as the document that proves that you are eligible. But in case, for example, that you defended your PhD in the UK or in some other country that has the same system, then it might be that you had your defense, your viva, and after the viva, then you were also asked to add something to your thesis, so it was not considered sufficient, and then you must have a certificate from the university that either states the viva date or where the date when your thesis after these corrections was considered sufficient. So in case you do not have the date of the defense, the date of the viva on your official PhD certificate, you must ask for an additional certificate from the PhD awarding institution. So I expect that by now many universities have a system of know what you're asking for and have a system of giving out these certificates. And it is very important to do that early on, because at the time of the submission on the 2nd February, then you really must have this certificate in place. Then the second criterion for Consolidator grants to discuss now is the funding. So the funding, we will also look at the funding a bit later in more detail, but the funding is really considerable. You are awarded, in case of the positive answer, you are awarded up to 2 million euros for the 5 years of the grant duration. And as if 2 million was not a large number in itself, you can also apply already in your application for additional funding. And I will explain later what are the conditions for applying for this additional funding. So the grant altogether can be up to 3 million euros. You can, of course, apply for a smaller amount as well, especially if your research is not very expensive. If your research is related to you, maybe a small number of your team members working in front of computers or in archives, then you might want to ask for a smaller amount. It is, of course, not an obligation to go up to the 2 million. One of the most frequent questions that I get is, okay, is my CV competitive enough to apply for a Consolidator grant or any other ERC grant? And the ERC itself has tried to answer this. And in the work program, they describe what is the profile of a Consolidator grant applicant. And the profile mainly says that to really to be a competitive applicant, you must have already shown some research independence and some evidence that you are a mature researcher. So you don't need to have your own research group, but it could be a good indication that you are already independent and mature researcher. But you must have some proof that you belong to this competitive Consolidator grant principal investigator category. And one of the ways of looking at the research independence is to look at your publications. And it is encouraged for a Consolidator grant applicant to have several, and they don't mention how many, important publications as a main author or or without the participation of the PhD supervisor. So the independence here really is considered like independence from your supervisor, independence from sort of big names in your field, independence that you are the author of the ideas that lead to these publications. So everybody can take a critical look at their CV and really try to find the aspects that show that you have this research independence and you have some evidence of maturity. And if the more, the better, of course. But as I said, there is no numerical indication of what does it mean, because as ERC funds research in all fields, and they also fund researchers that come from very different research landscapes. In some countries, it is for a young researcher almost impossible to publish something without the addition of their research former research PhD supervisor. So the ERC is, of course, flexible in the assessment, but you should try to convince the panel members that you are actually independent and mature. I don't see any questions now, so I will just continue, and I will still encourage you whenever you have a question to just raise your hand or type it in the chat or the question and answer tool. So this was about eligibility and the profile of the competitive principal investigator. So the eligibility window of 7 to 12 years can be extended. And extensions are related to your personal life and also by your social life. So the first extension, the first type of extension, the most often used, is extension related to having children. And here the rules are very simple to understand. So it doesn't matter when the child was born or how many children you have, whether the child was born before or after your PhD defense, it doesn't matter. And all female researchers can almost automatically apply for 18 months per child. The only proof that is needed is a copy of the birth certificate of the child. So in case you have 4 children, you can deduct 6 years or add 6 years to this 12 years after PhD. Then it could have been that you stayed at home longer than 18 months with your child. And then it is also possible to apply for a longer than 18 months. If you stayed at home less than 18 months, it doesn't matter. You can still apply for the full 18 months and no additional proof or certificate is needed. But if you apply for a longer period, then you need additional documentation to prove it. And this additional documentation can be in the form of a certificate issued by social services or issued by your employer. So for female researchers, 18 months per child plus longer if necessary. For male researchers, also you can apply for some extension related to your children. Again, it doesn't matter if they when they were born, but for male researchers, the extension can be in the amount of actual paternity leave taken. So sometimes even the 2 weeks taken at the birth of the child pushes your eligibility from one group to another. So it really depends if this has any meaning in your case or not. So the extension for children, in case of male researchers, is always supported by official documentation that prove that you took the leave. It can be by your employer or by social services. Now, there are also other grounds for extensions. Some of them are brand new, added this year, but these other grounds are always related to events that happened after your PhD defense. And these events can be, for example, long-term illness. If, for example, you were ill for a longer period, the ERC says that long-term is more than 90 days. So anything more than 90 days, and you can apply for extension for this reason. Then it can also be long-term illness of your family member when you took off time from work to care for this family member. So it can be also maybe your child or your parent. The important thing is that you must have proof for it. So in the case of illness, it must be a doctor's certificate about this long-term illness and also proof that you were off work for the duration of more than 90 days. Then for medical doctors, you can apply for extension related to the clinical qualification that you clinical training that you had after your PhD. And of course, if you went to national service, then also this time can be used as a ground for extension. The 2 new grounds for extensions are natural disasters and seeking asylum. So natural disasters here, it is very important to note that COVID-19 is not considered under this category. Natural disasters means perhaps there was an earthquake or there was a flood and maybe your lab was flooded and you could not do research, then this can also be considered as a ground for extension. And seeking asylum, unfortunately, in today's world, this happens to a lot of researchers that they have to leave their country of origin and seek asylum elsewhere. And this time is also considered as a ground for extension. So these are an overview of the possible extensions of the eligibility window, which for Consolidator Grant is 7 to 12 years after PhD. I'm checking if there are any questions, and I can see that someone has written in the chat, and there are There is a question from Natalia. If you got your PhD 14 years ago and you have one child, then yes, unless there are other grounds for extension, then no, you are out of the eligibility window and you are already considered an advanced researcher. You have to apply for an advanced grant. But in case, unless of course you stayed at home for more than 18 months with your child and can prove that, that can be part of the extension, or some other events that I mentioned. So yes, for female researchers, 18 months is the a default extension per child. And Kaspar asks what is considered as a proof of independence, and first author and last author, are they or corresponding author, are they both considered as proof of independence? I would definitely say yes. But of course, you have to stress your role, your independence in the CV. It is not a numerical calculation. But if you have authors where you are the last author or the corresponding author, and this is certainly proof of your important role in the case of these publications. There, I don't see any further questions at the moment, so I will go back to my slides. And here is one more thing, the restrictions. So there are also restrictions that apply in case of all ERC grants. So some people might not be allowed to apply at a certain year, but these restrictions, they only apply to people who have already applied for ERC grants. So if you applied for an ERC grant before and you did not pass to second stage and you received a B or a C score, then in the case of C, usually there are 2 years that must pass before you can reapply. And in case of B, there is 1 year that you cannot apply, and then you cannot reapply again. In case you did apply before and you received a B or C, you can consult this table, which is published in the work program every year, and you can clearly see if there are any restrictions related to your score in previous calls. But I assume that perhaps this point does not apply to you. If it does, then please check carefully that you are allowed to participate. So the score of C at the first stage has results in restrictions it normally results in restrictions, but the only exception is the synergy grant. Synergy grant is usually applied for by people who belong to the advanced category of researchers. So the starting and consolidator categories do not apply that much. And to encourage younger researchers to apply more for synergy, the restrictions are lifted for synergy grant related to starting and consolidator. So for example, if you participated in a synergy grant proposal last year, and even if you got a score of C, you can still apply for starting and consolidator this year. So the restrictions only apply to advanced grants and synergy grants. But I do expect that it is not relevant to you in particular. So let us continue with the funding part. The funding, you will apply to funding according to the needs of your research. So you devise your own, you design your own budget. You say how much funding goes for salaries and what are the salary levels, and how much funding goes to buying stuff and the salaries of PhD students and travel, etc. So it's a normal salary, normal budget building exercise. The budget can be up to 2 million, but it is important to remember that this 2 million also includes the indirect costs, and the indirect costs are calculated automatically, and they constitute 25% of the eligible direct costs. So the actual amount that you have, a free amount that you are planning is smaller than 2 million euros. And so we come to the reasons of why you might want to apply for additional funding. This additional funding can be up to 1 million euros. It has to be very well justified, but of course the total budget also has to be very well justified. So in the case of applying for additional funding, it cannot be done just when you think that you need more money. There are 4 types of expenses that allow you to apply for the additional funding. So the first type of cost is when the principal investigator is currently not residing in Europe, and when they receive this grant, they will undertake a move from where they are currently, let's say Australia, to Europe. Then the startup costs, so to speak, for the principal investigator to move to the European country are considered eligible costs, and they can be applied for under the additional funding. Then purchase of major equipment. There is no definition of what is major or what is minor. So it is a subjective assessment by you when you apply, and of course by the panel members who evaluate your proposal. But the thing is that if your research idea is really groundbreaking and you do need some expensive equipment, then the goal of the panel members definitely is not to save money. They want you to do this very exciting research, and they are likely to approve this additional funding. So you can consider this you can freely apply for this additional funding for major equipment. It is not that it is considered an excessive cost, but of course, if it is a kind of equipment that would normally be expected to be present in the host institution, then maybe you have to justify a little bit more. Then another type of cost that allows you to apply for above 2 million euros is access to large facilities. And these large facilities are usually the large European infrastructure. For example, if you are conducting some experiments in CERN, then the costs related to these are also allowed to be added to the grant above the 2 million euro limit. And the final one, the final 4th one, is actually opens the door to a lot of possible ways of applying for the additional funding. Actually, you are allowed to apply for additional funding also for other major experimental and fieldwork costs. Just personnel costs are not eligible under the additional funding. So let's think, for example, imagine that your research involves a lot of sequencing of DNA. So this sequencing could be something that you put under additional funding, or that you are going on field work to the rainforests of Amazonia. You have a lot of travel costs and local costs, costs related to permits, costs related to actual field work activities, maybe drilling, maybe something else. And the field work, of course, doesn't have to be in Amazonia. It can be also in the very same country where you conduct your research. So any expensive costs related to field work and experimental research can be added above the 2 million euros. The other condition that is related to the PI and his or her work time is the fact that the PI, in case of applying for a Consolidator grant, must commit a certain percentage of their time towards this grant. So the grant does not have to cover the personnel costs, but the person and the PI in question has to prove that they devote at least a certain percentage of their working time to this grant, to the execution of this research project. And the 40% here is really a minimum time that is demanded by ERC, and you are most encouraged to go much, much higher than 40%. So the 40% really is the absolute minimum. You can always go higher. It will not be punished. Quite the contrary. We have heard evaluators who are assessing the grants, the starting and consolidator grant application. And when an applicant goes for the absolute minimum, then the evaluator says, this is not a direct quote, but basically the emotion is as follows, that this project is that you're applying for to ERC is a dream project. This is the most exciting idea that you have that you put forward to the ERC. And then you only want to devote 40% of your time to this most exciting idea. So there is a dissonance between this. So it is rather, I would recommend you to go much higher. However, this percentage should take into account that you might have also other duties in the host institution. And of course, these other duties could be related to teaching or administrative costs or mentoring or other projects that you are involved in. So this percentage should allow you to also devote your time to these other duties in the host institution. And these duties could also change during the course of the implementation of this consolidator grant. So the consolidator grant is for 5 years. And it might be that you start with a larger time commitment to this grant, and towards the end of the consolidator grant, you devote more time to other duties, for example, seeking other funding, writing, and maybe starting new projects. So the percentage that you commit here will become part of your grant agreement. It will become on a contractual obligation, but it is not that you have to spend exactly that percentage every month. Rather, it is expected that it will be a cumulative commitment throughout the 5 years. And front loading is always positively viewed, like you start with as I said, with a stronger commitment in the beginning to get this team going, to get this project going, and then perhaps towards the end you devote less time. So the ERC grant, the reports will take that into account, and you will be actually committed to spending at least the amount of time. You can always spend more. There is no problem with that. So if you commit to 80 and you actually spend 90, nobody complains. But of course, major changes in the budget, for example, will need some prior agreement from the project officer. The additional criterion is that the PI must spend at least 50% of their working time in Europe. It means that people who have a double commitment, perhaps they work in the US and they also work in Europe, they have to be at least half of their time in Europe to be eligible for this grant. Of course, this applies to when you get the grant, not when you apply. Are there any questions about this? I don't see any in the chat. You can also raise your hand or just grab the microphone and ask the question whenever you have it. So I expect that everything is clear with funding. And we can continue with the actual application forms. So the application forms are somewhat similar to other Horizon Europe applications, but they also have their own distinct features. The application form example, not the template, but the non-editable example of the application forms can be downloaded from this link that I have included, and I will send my slides to you after this event. so you have a good overview of what is requested from the application. So first of all, these you always have the administrative forms. This is called the Part A of the proposal, and the administrative forms are filled in directly in the funding and tenders portal. And some parts of it will be filled in automatically by your choice of host institution. The administrative forms are very similar to other Horizon Europe applications. They contain the general information, including abstract. It is in these forms that you select the evaluation panel for your application, and you include the keywords that describe your research. Then there is administrative data on the participating organizations. In most ERC grants, there is just one organization, the host institution of the principal investigator, but you can also have partner organizations. For example, it is allowed that some members of your team, they actually work in different organizations. And in that case, this different organization might have their own budget and also be included in the administrative forms. Then there will be data on the principal investigator, him or herself. And then there is a section for budget and on the all the explanations related to the budget. So this is also included in Part A. And finally, there is ethics and security issues questionnaire, and then some space to include information, explanations about the identified ethics and security issues in your proposal. So this has changed somewhat since a couple of years ago. Previously, this additional information, the explanations were uploaded as a separate document, but now, first of all, you include the explanations in this ethics box in Part A, but sometimes this ethics box is not sufficient to hold enough information that you want to give to the ERC about the ethics issues. So you can also augment it by uploading a separate document on ethics in addition to the explanations that you include there in Part A. It depends very much on your research project and the type of information that you want to give under ethics. For example, if you already have some ethics permits or you have some questionnaires that you will be using to, for example, informed consent questionnaires, etc., that you will be using, then the advice is to include as much as possible already in the application phase, because if your proposal is considered for funding, then in the grant preparation phase, you might have to add a lot of ethics documents if requested by ERC. So it is a good idea to add as much as you have available already in the application phase. And at the end of the Part A, there are some additional questions related to data, etc. Now, the Part B is a concept that is used in all Horizon Europe applications, but in ERC, the Part B is quite different from the Part B of the other Horizon Europe grants and calls, because the scientific excellence is the only criterion against which the proposals are evaluated. Then there are no sections like impact or implementation in your Part B files. And also the Part B files, the B1 and the B2, they reflect the way ERC applications are evaluated. In the first step of evaluation, only Part B1 is evaluated. And in the second step of evaluation, both B1 and B2 are considered. So this is very important to keep in mind. I have heard several times from grant writers or applicants that they think that B2 is the most important part of your application. It is certainly not unimportant, but I would say that nobody will read your B2 if your B1 is not good enough. So I would say that it is a wrong approach to devote less time and less care to B1. Also, when writing your application, you should consider that the B1 and the B2 are read by different target audiences. And I will explain that a little bit more in the coming slides, but B1 will only be read by panel members. And panel members, only maybe one or two of them are narrow specialists of your particular field. The others are specialists in nearby fields. And the panels, we will come to that very soon, the panels in ERC are quite broad. So for example, the whole of mathematics is in one panel. So when you write your B1, you might want to target not narrow specialists, but generalists. You want the other members of the panel also to understand what you are proposing, to understand the importance of it, but also to understand the methodology behind it and to grasp the groundbreaking nature. So it is very, very important to maybe direct B1 to generalists. B1 cannot refer to B2. You can't say that read more in page 5 of my B2, because B1 has to be evaluated at step 1 as a standalone document. So B1 has to, on the one hand, have all the information that is necessary to evaluate the groundbreaking nature and the feasibility of your project. But at the same time, it must be something that excites the panel. So it must raise their curiosity. They might, you want to make them want to read the B2 to really see what you are proposing. So these are maybe the suggestions how to approach your B1 part. So the B1 consists of the 5-page extended synopsis. And then there are 2 pages for your CV. It is quite a standard template for a CV. And 2 pages for your track record. And the track record basically means publications. And you can also add a narrative part explaining your role and the importance of such publications. Then we come to B2. Now, B2 is something that you will write to specialists in your field. So this can contain the terminology and maybe the complicated details that not all panel members will be able to grasp, because if your proposal passes to step 2 of evaluation, then additional experts will be invited to read and comment on your proposal. And these additional experts will be specialists in the very specific field that your proposal belongs to. These we are used to in many evaluation systems that just 3 experts read one proposal. Here in ERC, the number of experts invited to read your proposal is much higher. It depends sometimes, but it can reach the order of 10 people reading your application. And their opinions can also differ. So you might get, when you later get the evaluation results, you will get all the expert opinions included anonymously. And it can be that some say that it is the best project I have ever seen, and some say that it is not novel at all and total rubbish. So it is up to the panel later to actually decide. Of course, they take into account what the experts say. They don't, this is not just definitely the expert opinions matter, but the decision power lies with the panel. And they, of course, the experts also have to justify why they think it's the best proposal, or if they have the opposite opinion, they will also have to justify their opinion, otherwise the panel will not consider it. And the B2 part contains 2 sections. One is called State of the Art and Objectives, and the other is Methodology, including your work plan. Still no questions, so I will continue with the additional documents. Just to mention that the B1 and B2 have very strict page limits that you have to observe them, and the both parts will be uploaded as PDF documents into the submission system. And you can also upload some additional documents. Some additional documents are mandatory. In the case of Consolidator Grant and in fact, in case of all ERC grants, the first mandatory additional document that you must upload is the host institution confirmation letter. The host institution is not part of the Part B. You don't describe the host institution, but the host institution has to sign a commitment letter. This commitment letter is given in the templates, and it has a very strict format. The host institutions cannot change it. They cannot improvise. They just have to fill in the blanks and sign it. In Estonian organizations, there is always quite a clear procedure who is allowed to sign such confirmation letters. Usually researchers in universities, they have to approach their research departments or the grant offices, and those people will help you to get it signed. And my advice is to do it well in advance, so not leave it at the very last moment. I know that in some institutions, some big universities in Europe who are very competitive regarding their ERC success rates, etc., they have already a kind of pre-selection in place who is allowed and who is not allowed to apply with their organization. So there is a pre-selection of the ideas and researchers. As far as I know, in Estonian universities and research organizations, there is no such pre-selection, and researchers are encouraged and allowed to apply. And of course, they also receive assistance from grant offices and research departments. Another obligatory additional document in case of Consolidator Grant is your PhD certificate, and in case needed, some additional certificates that include the date of the viva. And you might need to upload some other documents. We already mentioned the birth certificates or the documents that prove your eligibility, that you have the right for an extension of the eligibility window. So all these documents have to be uploaded. And also, as just mentioned a second ago, then the additional documents related to ethics, if applicable, they have to be uploaded as well. So ERC forms have plenty of room for many additional documents, but you are encouraged to stick to the additional documents that are requested by the ERC and not include any random additional documents such as support letters, which will be ignored in any case. So no support letters are requested, and no need to upload any. So the ERC panels are, as I explained, are mainly administrative construction to enable ERC to evaluate them, the applications. Currently, there are 11 panels under physical sciences and engineering, 9 panels under life sciences, and 7 panels under social sciences and humanities. The panel descriptions and the panel structure may change. Of course, it won't change for this year, but the Scientific Council of ERC has the right and also the obligation to sometimes revise the panel structure, sometimes because there are developments in the research, and sometimes because it is necessary to even out the workload of different panels so that they have if the panel gets too many applications, it is already impossible to do all the evaluation procedure properly. So it might be broken down or rearranged into different panels. But in principle, the panels stay the same. And this allows the ERC to reuse the panels. The panels are thematic divisions, but they also mean people. So each evaluation panel consists of renowned researchers in the field who are the panel members. So each panel has a panel chair and panel members. And it is not even a secret that ERC panels work every second year. So the panel that will evaluate your applications is very similar to the panel that evaluated applications in 2021. So it is something that you are advised to do in preparation of your submission, to look at the potential panel members, meaning the panel list in 2021, because the ERC does not, of course, publish the panel members in advance. So we don't know who are the members of the 2023 panel, except for the panel chairs. They are published sometime towards the deadline, but we can download from the ERC website the lists of panel chairs and panel members of previous years. Just a word of warning, it is of course absolutely forbidden to contact any of those potential panel members or to seek their advice or to, well, in any way mention that you will be applying or whatever. This is considered a breach of rules. But for yourself, it is very, very useful to think of who actually are the members. And this will help you write B1 in particular. So you will see who are the readers. Maybe you can identify who is most likely the researcher, the panel member who is the closest to your field, and what is their background and how to write the B1 in a way that you target this person or the wider panel members in general. So I would really recommend that you check out these panel member lists. The ERC does not give much information. It is just a list of names. It doesn't include any countries or any fields. It is up to you to actually find out who they are from the point of view of research. So you have to do some Googling probably to identify these researchers. And I think this approach will help you to write your B1. You should think of the specific people who are reading it, and they should understand it. They should be excited by what you propose, and they should really want you they should really want to read your B2 to learn more about your proposal. Any questions? None that I can see. So here is the list of the ERC panels. As I said, they are quite wide, but in the work program, you will see also detailed keywords related to each of the panels. So you will, if you want to, if you're not absolutely sure to which panel your proposal might belong, then consult this detailed list of keywords. And most probably you will find the panel that is the most suitable for your research. So the panels are wide, but it still sometimes happens, and it could be quite a frequent thing that you are thinking, should I apply to one panel or another panel? So maybe you are thinking, should I apply to systems and communication engineering or products and process engineering, because your research is in between these panels. Or it could be even that you are considering several different panels from different fields of research, like you are considering whether to apply to archaeological panel or the panel of genetics, because your research is about both of these things. Then you can have a look at the previous research that is funded by these panels to maybe understand more precisely where your proposed research idea belongs better. And the fact that the that you can access the lists of funded projects and their abstracts and also their publications via the ERC website. I think that will help you in that regard. Also, sometimes, or this is actually the only recommendation that makes any sense. Nobody can tell you which is the best panel for you. The only recommendation, general recommendation that makes sense is to consider where do the outputs of your research belong? So who will be most excited about the outcomes of your research? Will your research push back the boundaries of knowledge more towards archaeology or more towards genes? And then you will be able to better choose the panel. Sometimes there is a need to indicate maybe even two panels, and the proposal forms allow you to do that. So you can indicate a primary panel, and then you can indicate a secondary panel if you wish. But the secondary panel, there always has to be a primary panel. So the proposal will be evaluated in one panel, but experts from the second panel will be invited to contribute to the evaluation. Statistically, however, there is a slight, very, very slight disadvantage to doing that. So we see statistically that those projects those proposals that have indicated a secondary panel have a slightly lower success rate. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't indicate a second panel when it's really necessary, but just the ERC itself is also looking into ways of ensuring that truly interdisciplinary research gets a fair and proper evaluation. So just for you to be aware that this problem still exists even in the ERC evaluation. Usually it is because both experts from both fields, they are critical of the depth of information or the contribution that you are giving in their field. So be cautious, but still it is possible to indicate a secondary panel. Any questions about panels? Don't see any questions at the moment, so I will continue with the evaluation procedure. We already mentioned that there is a two-step evaluation, and in the first step, only part B1 is read by only the panel members. So no one else, just the panel members, will read and then assess and discuss your step 1 B1 proposals. After reading all the proposals that are submitted to that particular panel, they meet for a panel meeting, they discuss and they agree which ones will be invited to step 2. And as a rule, 3 times the amount of the available funds will be invited to step 2. So the step 2 evaluation has a more or less fixed success rate of 30%. Those which are not invited to step 2 will get a score of B or C, and we already discussed what are the consequences of receiving a B or C in step 1. So it means that you will be restricted from reapplying the next or for 2 next years. Then those proposals that are invited to step 2, then the part B2 will be included in the evaluation. We have been reassured by several panel members that actually step 2 evaluation starts basically from scratch. So they don't take into account the scoring or the percentages of the proposals in step 1. So they start from scratch, they look at the whole proposal, and they also invite then the remote reviewers to read the full proposals. And the panel members themselves also, they read full proposals. everybody who is invited to step 2 is also invited to an interview. In previous years, only starting and consolidator grantees were invited to interview, but now also advanced grant applicants are invited to interview. So everybody has this obligatory interview phase. COVID-19 made some changes in how the interviews are conducted. Previously, everybody was in Brussels present, so all the applicants were invited, and of course their travel was also paid by the ERC to come to Brussels, and it was a physical meeting of the panel and the interviewees. But now the panel, in the COVID years, everything was remote. And actually in 2020, the starting grants even didn't have an interview. So they were just assessed based on B2. But nowadays, the system has more or less consolidated, so to speak, and the interviews have a strict format. They always had a strict format, but now it is a strict online format. The panel now in post-COVID times is participating from Brussels, so they all sit in the same room, but the applicants will not be invited to travel to Brussels. They have an online interview. And each panel decides and sends very detailed instructions to the people who are invited to the interview. You will know exactly whether you are allowed or not allowed to use a PowerPoint presentation. During COVID years, for example, it was not allowed to use PowerPoint presentations by most panels because the system was a bit difficult and they wanted to give everybody the same chances. So irrespective of from which country and by which means the people participated, they still had the same quite inconvenient instructions. But nowadays, they usually there is the panels invite you to prepare some presentations with a restricted number of slides. And you have a very certain number of minutes for your presentation, and then the rest of the interview is question and answer based. So you should prepare yourself very, very well for the interview. We recommend very much to organize mock interviews. And when I explain how the Estonian Research Council helps Estonian applicants, then I will also mention what kind of support we give to those who reach step 2 for their training. And in step 2, you can also get a score of A or B. B means that, well, your proposal was good enough to go to step 2, but not good enough to be funded. And A means that it is good enough to be funded, but not always all the A's get funded. It is up to the limit of funding. And after the whole evaluation procedure has been completed, the applicants also receive full feedback, including all the comments of both the panel and the remote reviewers. It is also possible to contest the evaluation results, but only and only in the case when there is a technical error that you spot in the evaluation feedback that, let's say, the panel says that, for example, yeah, it is really a technical error. I will not break a good example here. It is called redress procedure, and in the redress procedure, you can say that the evaluation was not done properly. Of course, having evidence of that in your evaluation feedback, but you cannot contest the competence of the panel members and the remote reviewers. So here in nutshell are what the evaluation outcome means. So in step 1, A means basically you are passing to step 2. B and C will result in some restrictions the following years. In step A means that yes, your project is fantastic, we would like to fund it, and ERC will fund it, of course, if their funds are available, but they will have a list, a priority list of all the A scored proposals. And of course, it might be that there are a lot of very, very good proposals, but not enough funding. So sometimes the A's also don't get funded. And B means that even if we had money, we would still not give it to you. So, but you are, if you receive a B in step 2, you are still allowed to reapply the very next year. I wonder if there are any questions about the evaluation procedure or the evaluation results. I can't see any questions in the chat. You can also just switch on your microphone or raise your hand if you want to ask orally. If not, I will come to the evaluation criteria. So as was said, ERC uses only one evaluation criteria, and this is scientific excellence. But this scientific excellence is broken down into 3 sub-criteria. 2 of them are related to your research project, and 1 of them is related to your own research potential or research track record. So the first question that your proposal is evaluated against is the groundbreaking nature and potential impact of the research project. When ERC uses the word impact, they mostly mean scientific impact. So it is not necessary in ERC proposals to discuss the economic and social impact of your proposal. However, if your project has a clear economic and social impact, then don't hesitate to mention it. And in case of projects that are closer perhaps to applied research, then this economic impact might be a very important aspect of your proposal. Let's say you devise a new way of producing microchips that will make the process much faster and safer, and definitely this is something that you want to mention in your proposal. This groundbreaking nature and potential impact is assessed via the 3 questions. So first of all, to what extent does the proposed research address important challenges? So you have to address something that is relevant for your field. Then secondly, to what extent are the objectives ambitious and beyond the state of the art? So you really want to show that your research is not what the ERC calls incremental research. So incremental research is almost a dirty word in ERC language, and it means that you are not ambitious, you just do more of the same, maybe in a different context or expanding a little bit. So what you propose definitely must not be incremental research. And finally, the ERC wants you to propose high risk, high gain research. It means that the potential gains of this project must be very high, but of course there should be, well, to have an ambitious project means that it can also fail. And this is maybe the most important thing to consider when you build your research proposal, is how to balance on the narrow edge of high risk, high gain on the one side and feasibility on the other side. Because the ERC also wants your research to be feasible. It is not just a crazy idea, but you must prove in your proposal that you are also very likely to succeed. So this balance can be very tricky. And you can fall on both sides and fail for both reasons. You can propose something that is too risky, and they decide based on your methodology and your previous track record that perhaps it is not likely that you will succeed with this. And on the other hand, you can fail because what you propose is not ambitious enough for ERC. So a very common comment that we see in the evaluation outcomes is that, well, this is something that the national research councils could also fund. So you want to propose to ERC something that the national research councils cannot fund, maybe because it's so ambitious, it's or because it's brings you outside the comfort zone. The second sub-criterion is scientific approach. And here you see that the first of these questions is asked for B1, for the extended synopsis, the 5 pages in your B1. And the second, third, and fourth question are asked only in case you pass to step 2 of evaluation. So those 3 questions have to be answered by your B2. And these questions are, so feasibility is the first one. Already in the extended synopsis, you have to give enough information about your methodology. You might have maybe preliminary results that support your ambitious research proposal. You have previous results from that prove that you are the person to do it. And based on B2, you go into more detail. Is the research methodology appropriate? Do you develop a novel methodology? And is the work plan realistic? So is the timeline, resources, and here we see again the PI commitment adequate and properly justified. And just to remind you again, so the PI commitment, you have to justify a smaller commitment. You are always encouraged to go full on to commit as much time as you have available to the project. It is not penalized. The last and final part of this evaluation criterion relates to yourself. So here, these are the questions that have to be answered by your CV and your track record that you present in B1. And your track record should demonstrate that already previously you have conducted groundbreaking research. You have the ability to do so. You have already demonstrated that you are a creative and independent thinker. And finally, that you have the required scientific expertise and capacity to execute the project. Of course, you will tackle this project together with your team members. The team members might be just theoretical team members, like you say, you will hire 2 postdocs and 3 PhD students to your team, but they could also be members that you already have in your team. And of course, their expertise is also considered as part of the project. But it is expected that you are in command of your project, so that you have the most critical skills and knowledge to execute this project by yourself. You do not rely to a very large extent on skills and knowledge of your team members that you do not have yourself. So take care when you describe your team. Also, it concerns involving senior researchers in your team. Of course, it is possible to also involve senior researchers, but it must be very, very clear that you remain the person in charge of the whole project, and that it is your idea, not just a sub idea of someone more senior person in your team. So this was the last evaluation criterion, and this brings me to almost to the end of my presentation. This is the last slide of where I give you the sources and information for the Consolidator Grant 2023 call for applicants. But I have one more slide that is related to the types of support and, to be more precise, types of financial support that the Estonian Research Council gives to applicants in Estonia. So there are two major sources of information for your Consolidator Grant application. So the first source of information is the Funding and Tenders portal. This is the portal that is the technical gateway for your application. You go to this portal, there you will find all documents necessary for your application, and there is also the link to the electronic submission system. So you submit your proposal via the Funding and Tenders portal, and the Funding and Tenders portal has all the information that you need for submitting the proposal. But there is a lot of additional information, and the additional information, some of it we already mentioned, like the previously funded research grants by ERC, then the list of members of ERC panels, then there are training videos that the ERC themselves have commissioned and put up on their website and their YouTube channel. You can go to previous events. You will see a number of information events organized by the ERC, where you can find all kinds of presentations, maybe by successful grantees and evaluators, etc. So there is a wealth of information to be found on the ERC website. I must say that the ERC just redesigned their website. It is still a work in progress, and some parts of the new website are maybe not as user-friendly as they used to be. So one of these parts is the list of documents. So the only possibility to find a certain document in the list of documents is actually by keyword search. So if you are looking for panel members, you must search in the document library for panel members, and you will find the document, the lists. But just to browse through it is almost impossible, because it has like 800 plus documents in what seems to be a random order. So it is a bit annoying to look for documents. But if you know what you're looking for, then the keyword search works well. So this wraps up my info on the Consolidator Grant 2023 call. And now in my next slide, I will describe the financial support measures for ERC applicants that the Estonian Research Council currently has and will have in the next year. Estonian Research Council has supported the ERC grantees already several years, and we used a program that had the name Mobilitas Plus program. And this Mobilitas Plus program was funded from structural funds. The structural funds period is ending, and in the next year we are starting new programs. This new program has a tentative name. It is not yet finalized. I will call it here Mobilitas 3.0. So the next program funded from the new period of structural funds, and this new program will be put in place probably by the end of October. There will be it will be signed and finalized, and the funding period will probably start from the very beginning of 2023. So the new program is expected to have the same support measures that we had until now. Some of them are continuous, but in case of some support measures, there might be a small gap between the two programs. So the support measures here are listed in the order in which you might use them. So the first support measure is financial support to visit ERC grant holders. We call it a visiting scheme. And we give funding to researchers based in Estonia who want to go on a visit to an ongoing ERC grant team and talk to the grantee, maybe participate in their research, and also learn how to write, maybe consult with this ERC grantee on how to write a competitive proposal, maybe get some tips and information from them, and also develop research contacts with this team. And these short visits, we normally announce the calls for such short visits twice a year, in spring and in autumn. And we were supposed to open the short visit call in October. But as we are at the end of the previous program, we are now looking into the legal aspects. Can we announce this call while the new program is still under development? It hasn't been signed. In any case, if we do manage to open this call, the short visits cannot take place before next year. So I would say watch this space. We will announce, of course, the call very widely, and the short visits can last from just a week or a couple of days up to 2 months is the upper limit. The second type of support is called mentoring initiative. This is the initiative by the ERC themselves. The ERC invited from the one hand, they invited former panelists and grantees who would like to join this mentoring initiative. And on the other hand, they invited funding organizations such as us to join this mentoring initiative. And the Estonian Research Council joined this mentoring initiative as soon as it was possible 1.5 years ago. And it works as follows. So the ERC provides us with a list of former panelists and grantees that we can forward to you, the applicant. And these panelists and grantees can be involved in mentoring you. So in 2 ways. So first of all, you can invite them to comment on your proposal. You can send them the proposal and ask their comments. And the second is you can invite them to mock interviews if you pass to step 2 of the evaluation and you are preparing for your interview. Because they have the experience of such interviews, and they can coach you and explain to you what kind of questions you might expect, etc. And being specialists in your field or close field, you can rely on their insights on your proposal content. So this kind of mentoring initiative will continue next year. We will change a little bit how we manage it from our side. And definitely you are most welcome to use this mentoring initiative prior to deadline, when you already have more or less the final version of your application. And also, of course, if you pass to the second step of evaluation. What is the role of the Estonian Research Council is that we pay the mentoring fee to these former ERC panelists and grantees. So we pay them based on the work that they do, using a standard evaluator's fee fixed at a fixed rate. Then when you pass to second step and you need to prepare for the interview, we also can support you financially when you decide to take interview training with a company. Some rules apply. You have to take 3 offers, etc., and the price has to be reasonable, but we pay for training if you wish to undertake such training. It is my impression from talking to former grantees and former applicants that mock interviews, where you can ask the help of your host institution to conduct such, where you invite a mock panel to and you do a sort of as if real interview in front of researchers who can also be your colleagues and these mentors, etc., maybe colleagues from other organizations. This is much more useful than the standard interview training, which is more focusing on maybe how to do a great presentation in general. But both can be used. One does not exclude the other. And finally, the largest support measure that we have in terms of funding, we offer those applicants who apply with Estonian host organizations, we offer them a bridging grant in case they reach step 2 of the evaluation, but are not funded by the ERC. So if you apply with an Estonian organization, you get invited to the interview, but then finally you do not get the grant, you can turn to us and we will fund you for up to 1.5 years to bridge the time between one ERC call to another. What we request from you is that you reapply to the next or the call after. So this grant can be used for research, it can be used for training, it can be used for basically anything, for salaries, for traveling. We don't prescribe, but of course we require that you present to us a plan and a budget how you're planning to use this grant. And the grant is actually quite substantial. It is in the equal amount to the Estonian Research Council personal grant. So the amounts are in the order of 100,000 euro per year. And this was actually my last slide. I thank you for listening, and I